So let's go ahead and get started. And I want to thank everybody for joining me this afternoon. I do appreciate and honor your willingness to come spend some of your valuable time with me, and hopefully you'll find this information useful. Just as a quick background, my name is Brian Sanderoff. I'm a traditionally trained pharmacist. I used to own actually two pharmacies in downtown Baltimore at one time. And at one point in my career, I really came to understand that what we do in medicine is um, trying not to say this without with judgment. It doesn't serve many of our purposes well, especially when it comes to chronic disease. What we do in medicine with the medicines that we use for chronic diseases like blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, or depression, or osteoporosis, or diabetes, or whatever, those medicines that we take don't fix those problems. All they do is turn down the volume on your body talking to you. And so I've learned to look at health in a different way than I was taught in pharmacy school, and that how we are taught in general in our society here, and have started practicing in a different way. And I have been known to say that the number one killer in this country is not cancer. It is not heart disease. It is not diabetes. The number one killer in this country is misinformation. And so my mission with my work is really to help educate people appropriately, properly, to understand the true ramifications of their decisions. If as an adult you understand that if you smoke, you're likely to get lung cancer, I don't have a problem with you smoking. That's your decision as an adult. And I really am not here to say, hey, you shouldn't smoke. But I would contend that when it comes to our diet and our lifestyles and our exercise and our ideas about health, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so we make decisions based on information which is faulty, and thus we don't understand the true ramifications of those decisions. So I want to help people understand the ramifications. When they do that, then they can make their choices for themselves. And the topic for today is a biggie. And it is one that is really, really hard to overcome the misinformation about, because we are constantly told that grains are actually healthy for us and that we should have grains in our diet. And the majority of calories that we have in our diet should come from whole grains. This information comes from our government. It comes from medical. It comes from this thing that I call mother culture, because mother culture is always whispering in your ear about certain things. And one of those things is that, we should be eating whole wheat toast, and, we should be eating oatmeal and sandwiches with bread and rice, all that sort of stuff. And I'm here to tell you that that's backwards. And I'm going to make that case for you today. I'm going to try to explain it in ways that are understandable, even though some of the concepts that I'll be discussing are a little bit complicated when it comes to biochemistry. If I lose you in that discussion, then I want you to tell me that so that I can try to explain it in a way that's easier to understand. But I think I've done a pretty good job of distilling the information down to ways that you'll just raise your eyebrows and say, oh, wow, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we're going to get into it. Living grain-free, 8 weeks to change your life. And I put that in the title specifically for a reason, to help you understand that you have the ability to literally change the way your body works in as little as 8 weeks. And when you do that, the results, as you'll find out, are incredible. And so I would encourage you to take my challenge. And I know that's even more of a challenge during the holidays, but I will encourage you to take that challenge at some point in the near future and see what the results are for you. Okay, so living grain-free, 8 weeks to change your life. So number one is the need to understand the past is really important here. So a few questions that are going to get answered as we go through this are here. Number one is, how long have we been here as a species? And the truth is that we've been here a long time as a species through evolution, literally millions and millions and millions of years. And you can see the little illustration here in front of you. This leap from here, this fourth guy, which is hunter-gatherer, to modern man, this representation is not accurate because it looks like, all right, well, that's the same amount of time that we went from this to this or this to this. The truth is that from here to here, literally millions and millions of years. From here to here, from the fourth guy to modern man, relatively short period of time. We're talking about maybe 10,000 years, 15,000 years. And there was something that occurred with us as a species that was the beginning of the downfall when it comes to chronic disease and how our bodies work. And that's what I'm going to explain for you. So, number one, we've been here for an awful long time. When did our diets change drastically? Well, it changed with the occurrence or the advent of what we will call modern agriculture. And it didn't occur all that long ago, especially when you look at the bigger picture of how long we've been here as a species. Now, this understanding is key to understanding why grains are not a good food for us. What are the results of that change? We're going to answer all those questions as we go along. To start the discussion, we have to talk about our genetic development. So, number one, genes develop in response to a changing environment. This is also called sort of like natural selection. And so, in the face of a changing environment, small genetic differences between one individual and another will make it more or less likely for that particular individual to survive, depending on what the circumstances are. The one that does survive because of that genetic reason is more likely to pass on that particular gene to their offspring, thus making them more likely to survive, right? For humans, it takes a tremendously long period of time for this to happen. Now, in science, we've studied, different species where we can cause those changes to happen very quickly. But for humans, it takes a long time for this to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a decade. It doesn't happen in a lifetime. This kind of genetic change literally takes millennia to happen, hundreds of thousands of years. And in fact, the fossil record shows us that the human genome, which is sort of like the genetic makeup of all humans, has changed relatively little in the past 40,000 years. So that's since the emergence of what we would call behaviorally modern humans, humans that behave the way we do today. I want to give you an example of this in action. So once upon a time in our development as a species, our livers actually made vitamin C. But through millions of years of exposure to vitamin C from the fruits in our diet, in the Fertile Crescent in Africa, this is where we began as a species, our bodies literally lost the ability to actually make or manufacture vitamin C. Lost probably is not really the best word to use because it's more like the need just wasn't there anymore. And so the materials and energy needed to manufacture vitamin C over a very, very, very long period of time were better used in other ways. And so eventually, as a species, we no longer had the ability to make vitamin C. We didn't have the need to make vitamin C. So now, as our species expanded in population and migrated away from the Fertile Crescent, where less tropical conditions existed, we actually then had the potential to run into problems from not being able to make vitamin C because maybe it wasn't available in our food in different areas of the world. You get that? You understand that? So the point here is that our nutritional requirements have not changed that much. What that means is that our nutritional requirements, what we have genetically developed to be able to survive and thrive, are the same as they were before the advent of agriculture. And that point in time in history, the advent of agriculture, is important to understand why that is sort of like a left turn when it comes to our health. So let's get into it a little bit more. Modern agriculture. So what caused this quote unquote advancement? And I say that in quotations like that because there are those of us in the medical world who may look at that and say that really wasn't an advancement. It was a society advancement. It's what allowed us to be able to build our modern society today and communicate the way we do and live the way we do. But when it comes to health, I'm not sure that that really was an advancement. So there are various theories as to why, as a species, we invented or gravitated towards what is known as modern agriculture. When the human population was relatively low and game animals were plentiful, there was no reason to phase from being a hunter-gatherer to a farmer. It's interesting to note that the extinction of large mammals in Europe, in Asia, and in North America coincides with the adoption of agriculture. And so it's quite likely that pre-agricultural man had sufficient knowledge to sow seeds and grow plants, but the need wasn't there as long as food game was available. It's also interesting to note that it wouldn't be energetically efficient as an organism to grow plants as it would be to just forage for plants, right? Why grains? Why were grains the first thing that we started to grow as a people in this idea of early agriculture or modern agriculture? It's probably a few reasons. One, because they were easy to grow, and they also supplied a ready source of calories, which is a constant a constant state of being that an organism will strive towards, right? When food is not plenty, anything that is a ready source of calories seems like a good thing, a positive thing. Science wasn't understood then, but the results were certainly understood, and that is that you got calories from those grains. Let's go through a little history of those grains. So the first milling stones, and this is like the mechanism needed to grind grains down to something that the body could absorb. Because if you just consumed grains without grinding them first, your body doesn't have the ability to break them down to be able to use the nutrients or the calories that are captured inside those seeds, basically. And so the first milling stones were seen some 10 to 15,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers would not have had the ability or the desire to carry around with them the heavy equipment needed to actually grind grains. So the domestication of wheat first started in the Middle East, probably around 10,000 years ago, and from there it spread to Europe and Asia. Rice was domesticated in Southeast Asia around 7,000 years ago, and that's about the same time that corn was domesticated in Mexico and Central America, again around 7,000 years ago. So we have to also understand another piece of biochemistry, and that is this very important hormone called insulin and what its job is in the body and how we genetically developed insulin and its job in our body. So number one, it has to do with life preservation in times of famine. One of insulin's jobs is to tell sugar where to go in the body. So you eat something that gets broken down into sugar. The sugar circulates in the bloodstream. The pancreas is then sort of notified to release insulin to help escort sugar into various cells in the body. The first place that sugar wants to get stored as energy is in a form called glycogen. And that happens first in the liver and then in muscle cells. Glycogen is a more readily available source of energy. And this makes perfect sense because liver cells and muscle cells need a lot of energy to function properly. And also the breakdown of glycogen in the liver is what will supply sugar for the body in times of famine when there is no sugar coming from our diet. If the glycogen storage in the body, both in the liver and in the muscle, if that capacity is filled, then the body will convert the sugar into a more medium to long-term storage unit. We call that fat, and that's the purpose, one of the purposes of fat cells. It's just stored energy in our body. But what happens today when food is plenty? What happens to a species when they no longer have to worry about the availability of food on a daily basis? Well, because we have too many sugars in our diet in the various forms that they come in, including grains and especially processed and refined grains, the pancreas is constantly asked to produce more and more insulin. And this is not just an issue of how much sugar is in the food, but also how quickly that sugar hits the bloodstream. So if you have a food that has sugar in it, and when you eat that food, the sugar level in the blood goes up very quickly, that measure is called that food's glycemic index. The quicker blood sugar rises from eating something, the higher the glycemic index is of that food. And so if you were to eat just a straight animal protein like, an egg or a lamb chop or a piece of chicken, it literally has no glycemic index. There's no sugar in that food at all. If you were to eat a piece of fruit in its whole form, like an apple or a pear or a strawberry, its glycemic index is moderate. It has sugar. There are sugar in those foods that I just mentioned, but because of fibers and enzymes that are in that food, the rise in sugar from eating that food would happen in a measured way. If you were to eat a cake or a candy or a donut, the sugar would rise in the bloodstream very, very quickly. That's a high glycemic food. While any food that is grain based, even if you think it's healthy for you, is high glycemic, especially the more it's processed. So if you're eating a piece of 12 grain whole wheat bread for breakfast, for many of us and the way our bodies work, it's just like eating a Snickers bar. And I usually tell people if that's the case, you might as well just say eat the Snickers bar because it's more fun, right? And we're all about fun. So there is this occurrence that happens that's called insulin resistance. And this occurs when cells sort of stop listening to the knock at the door that insulin is supposed to be. So because of too much insulin going around in your body, when insulin goes to a cell and says, hey, I've got some sugar, let's take it in so you can use it for energy, the cell doesn't even listen to the knock at the door anymore. That's called insulin resistance. There's a lot of other names in medicine that we use for that condition. It can be called metabolic syndrome, it can be called syndrome X, it can be called prediabetes. And all of those terms really mean the same thing. And it's the condition where the body is not listening to insulin anymore. And this happens to the liver cells and the muscle cells first. And so one of the results of having too many sugars in our diet, and the result of having that, meaning high insulin levels, is that liver cells and muscle cells, even though they may not be filled to capacity with glycogen, that readily usable stored energy form, when insulin comes and says, hey, here's some sugar, let's fill up our glycogen stores, Mr. Liver Cell or Mr. Muscle Cell, they don't answer the door. And the body then does what? Well, it's going to save that energy for tomorrow, and he does it in the form of fat. So what are the physiological effects of having too much sugar in your diet? Well, number one, remember what insulin is for. Insulin is going to make it so that we do not waste any of that energy. Our body is very efficient at saving energy. And again, we have to look at this in this longer perspective. Your body, even though you are modern man and woman today, your body works just like your ancestors did when they were hunter-gatherers. And when your ancestors and my ancestors were hunter-gatherers, food was not necessarily plenty. We went through periods of not having food, a famine. And so when there are times of plenty when it comes to food, the body is going to remember when there weren't times of plenty, when there were times of famine, and it's going to want to store energy for those times. It's going to want to put some energy in the bank account. The body will continuously do that. We have a limitless ability to store energy. Now, it's interesting because there's actually a mechanism that our body has to tell us not to store too much energy. And it does it through the use of another very, very important hormone, which is called leptin. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit in detail because it's important to really understand this. So leptin is a hormone that's actually made by adipose tissue. It's actually made by fat cells. And leptin's function in the body is to regulate the amount of stored energy that we have. When you have enough fat, and again, that means stored energy, leptin is made and acts on parts in the brain, especially in the hypothalamus, to regulate appetite and energy expenditure. So when there's enough fat, when you have enough stored energy for whatever famine time is going to be coming down the road, there's a mechanism to tell your body to burn some of that fat as energy and to slow down appetite so you don't make more fat, so you don't get too much stored energy. Leptin levels are supposed to be highest between midnight and early morning, which makes perfect sense. It helps keep us from being hungry when we're sleeping. And when fat levels in the body are low, leptin levels go low, and that means we have a higher appetite and we burn fewer calories. And again, that makes perfect sense. So in times of famine, and we start to use up our fat stores, a couple physiological things happen through leptin. One of those things is we're going to slow burning of calories, and we're going to seek out more food. Our appetite's going to increase so that we can then try to build up our fat stores again, our stored energy again. Unfortunately, and this is the big unfortunately, we just talked about insulin resistance. Well, just like insulin resistance, we can also have leptin resistance. And the result of that condition, which almost every one of us are likely walking around with, are devastating when it comes to chronic health, because what it means is even though we have excess fat, we don't slow down our appetite. We keep eating more and we keep storing more, and we don't increase metabolism so that we burn off some of that fat. And so the result is that we get fatter and fatter and fatter. And point number 2 there on the screen, that leads to a limitless ability to store energy. And that is a huge problem. There is tremendous amounts of scientific research right now going on trying to understand better the role of leptin and how to manipulate leptin and leptin receptors in our bodies so that they listen to that leptin message, which then would lower appetite and increase metabolism better. So what are the sources of sugar in the diet? Well, obviously cakes and candies and donuts. I mean, that's obvious. And, I used that example earlier about people smoking, and that as an adult, if you understand that if you smoke, it's probably going to make you more susceptible to a lot of health issues, including cardiovascular issues and cancers, but you understand that. And if you decide to smoke, okay, that's your decision. Well, it's the same thing with cakes and candies. We know, and donuts, and we know that those things aren't healthy for us. There are other reasons why we eat those things, and I'll get into that a little bit. But here's where the misinformation comes in, because what we don't realize is that processed and refined grains across the board are just like cakes and candies for those of us that are walking around with what we call insulin resistance. So you can eat that 12-grain whole wheat bread, and you can be tricked into thinking that that's actually healthy for you, and it is not. At least not the way most of our bodies work. There are times and there are certain conditions where that food can be healthy for you. But for the vast majority of us, that is not the case, and we should not be eating that, because that processed and refined carb causes a spike in sugar, and that spike in sugar causes an over-release of insulin. And that over-release of insulin is what leads to all of the issues that we have in health that we're trying to avoid. What about corn? Is corn a grain, or is it a vegetable? It's a grain. Corn, same issue. What about starches? What about like potatoes and starchy foods? Same issue. One way or another, they turn into sugar in our diet, in our bloodstream. So I'm not saying that you should never eat a potato, but I'm saying that we eat too many potatoes, and we eat too big potatoes that are too big at one time. Okay, how does this translate into chronic disease? Well, insulin is one key, and we've talked about that, and hopefully you understand that. Inflammation is another key. And that also is very, very important to understand. Inflammation is the second key underpinning to every one of the chronic diseases that we are trying to avoid as we get older. There is not one chronic disease, there is not one disease that you have a family history of that you aren't more susceptible to because of inflammation in the body. I'm not talking about inflammation of your joints. I mean, we know what that is. It's called arthritis. It happens as we get older, we get sore joints or whatever. There's an underlying tendency towards inflammation that can be measured in a blood test, which is called C-reactive protein, or CRP, and that is clearly a measure of what's going on underneath the surface that leads to chronic disease. That and insulin levels, those are the two keys. And this is really, it's sort of important to go back to our history and understand the realities and the facts. So here are the facts. The fossil record indicates that early farmers, as compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors, had a characteristic, you ready for this? They had a reduction in stature, an increase in infant mortality, a decreased lifespan, an increase in infectious diseases, an increase in iron deficiency issues and bone mineralization issues, and an increase in dental caries and tooth enamel defects. And that is comparing them to their hunter-gatherer forebears. Early agriculture actually brought about worse health, not better. And what is the reason? Because of the grains that we were growing. So how do we reverse this trend? Well, it may seem obvious. It is obvious to me, and yet sometimes stating the obvious in simple terms helps cement it to us. So number one, you just have to avoid sugar completely. Now, I want to point out that when it comes to health and making changes, I'm generally not very radical. I'm more of a one step at a time, let's see what happens kind of a guy. For this particular issue, you have to jump into the deep end if you're going to see results. And so here's sort of like an analogy. If you walked into a room and there was an odor in that room, as you stayed in that room, your awareness of that odor would start to go away, and soon you wouldn't even recognize it anymore. And even if more of that odor was pumped into the room, you wouldn't smell it. You wouldn't recognize it. The only way for you to be able to detect that odor again is for you to get out of that room for a period of time and then come back in. Then you'd smell the odor again. It's the same sort of thing with the sugars in our diet. If you want to reverse insulin resistance, you have got to get the sugars and the processed and refined carbs out of your diet completely. You do that for a period of time. Then, when you add sugars back to your diet in moderation, your body will use that sugar in a completely different way. You will reverse the insulin resistance. Hopefully that makes sense. I want to say a little bit about sugar cravings because there are various reasons why we can have sugar cravings. Some of them have to do with something that's going on in our gut. Oftentimes, we are walking around with an imbalance of the good bacteria in our gut, and we have things that feed on that sugar growing in our gut that shouldn't be there. Yeasts and funguses. And when we stop feeding those yeasts and funguses that are in our gut, they create chemicals that make us want to have sugar. They sort of create the environment so that they'll for sure get fed. I also want to point out about the sugar cravings is that if you are a sugar junkie, and please understand that when I say a sugar junkie, I'm not just talking about cakes and candy. There are people that I know who never touch cakes and candy, but they eat bread and pasta and cereal and grains all the time. Those people are sugar junkies as well. If you are a sugar junkie, once you completely take them out of your diet, usually within 2 to 3 days, the sugar cravings are gone. But if you want that to happen, you have to jump in the deep end. You have to get the sugars completely out of your diet. And I'm telling you, this is not just my own personal experience. This is experiences that have been shared with me with countless patients of mine who have gone through this process as well. Once you get them out of your existence for a period of time, and usually it's just a few days, the sugar cravings will go away. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and that's why I put emotional eating here, because there are those of us who, from our life circumstances and from our parents or whatever, have learned that eating those foods can alter feelings that we have inside. And when I say alter, what I really mean is hide or numb ourselves to. And I always kid my mom, typical Jewish mom, for doing this to me. And that is, when I was a little kid, if I fell down and skinned my knee, what did mom say? Said, "Here, have a cookie, it'll make you feel better." And let me tell you, as an adult, that is a hard lesson to unlearn. So if you are an emotional eater and you have a tendency to go towards those high glycemic foods, and again, it's not just cakes and candies. Sometimes it's just the bread. I talk to people and they say, wait a second, but bread is so homey and grounding. Those are emotional responses to food. I'm not making a judgment about that, but see the reality in that. So if you're one of those people, a couple things that you can do. One is, on our website, right from the front page, you'll see a slider on there that talks about end emotional eating. My partner here at the office is a clinical hypnotherapist, and she made an excellent self-hypnosis CD called End Emotional Eating. And we guarantee that if you listen to that every day for 30 days, you will see differences in your emotional eating. There are lots of reasons why we eat other than just because we need the calories or we need something nutritionally. And so when you go to eat something, especially in the evening, and it's not healthy, it's a cracker, it's a pretzel, it's cake or candy or ice cream. When you go to eat that, before you have it, ask yourself a simple question. Just say, hey, am I really hungry, or am I bored, sad, lonely, angry, whatever? And you'll find that you're not really hungry, that you're trying to soothe yourself with that food. Find a different way to soothe yourself. Go out and take a brisk walk for 10 minutes. I can guarantee you won't want that food anymore, because you'll soothe yourself and you'll numb yourself to those feelings that are uncomfortable with the creation of endorphins, which is another way to sort of work through that. All right? I also want to talk, since I just mentioned that, I want to talk about the role of exercise in this process, because this goes back to where in the body sugar gets stored. And the first place that the body wants to store sugar is in the liver and in muscle cells in the form of glycogen. And when you use your muscles, you use that glycogen store up. So if you go out and you exercise, the energy that you'll get for using those muscles, the energy that you'll use in that exercise, is the glycogen in your muscles. Then when you eat something, and some of that something is sugar, then the body will be able to store that as glycogen first instead of as fat. So when you don't exercise, you don't use up those healthier short-term energy stores, and then the body has no choice but to store it longer term, and again, that's called fat. This is a help in reversing insulin resistance. This is one of the ways that you reverse insulin resistance. One, jump in the deep end as far as taking those sugars out of your diet. That means cakes and candies and donuts and ice cream, and it also means processed and refined carbs. It means bread and pasta and cereal and grains. And start to get some exercise, and you will see that reverse rather quickly. And again, I want to go back to our history. Let's look back again. For the vast majority of time that we have been on this planet as a species, meaning for the background that we've developed our genetic environment, our internal environment from, We did not have grains as a staple in our diet. And number two, we were constantly on the move. We did not sit at desks. We did not sit indoors. We got exercise. If you look at studies have shown that analysis of hunter-gatherers, they ate a tremendous amount of calories, more calories than we eat today. Why are we fatter? One, where those calories are coming from, and two, they had to go hunt down those calories. It wasn't served to them in a restaurant. They didn't just have to go to a grocery store and pick up a grocery cart full of food. They had to actually go out and find that food. And they burned calories when they did that. And if we look at the kind of exercise that we thrived with as a species, it was what today we would call interval training. It was short bursts of intense exercise separated by longer periods of less intense exercise. So the equivalent of that, if you were on a track running, would be sprinting for 100 yards and then jogging for 300 yards, then sprinting for 100 yards, then jogging for 300 yards. So whatever kind of exercise you're doing, it will serve you better if it is interval. And you can do that on any sort of machine that you want. You can do that on a treadmill or a stair stepper or a rower or whatever. Intense for a short burst, less intense for a longer period. Then short burst, and then that's the environment that we grew genetically under. And again, our genes have not changed very much at all from what they were 40,000 years ago. So that's the exercise part of it. So how about living grain-free? I have to tell you that when I have this discussion with my patients or I do a talk, I get a lot of resistance. I get a lot of funny looks from people because this is where Mother Culture has been whispering in our ears our entire lives. And it seems so odd that that may not be accurate or right. So what I really ask people to do, what I challenge you to do, is to do an experiment for yourself. Live grain-free for 8 weeks. That's all. It's not a lifetime sentence. It's an experience for 2 months and see what the result is for you. Number one, it requires a change in attitude because again, we have grown up with this idea that 12 grain whole wheat bread is good for us. And what we're supposed to have for breakfast is grain based. We're supposed to have cereal, and there's healthy cereal, right? Like oatmeal, like Cheerios. They don't have to be laden with sugar, and they can be healthy for us. So we can have a 12 grain whole wheat English muffin, and that's good for us. Or when we have our eggs, we can have those hash brown potatoes, and that's good for us. It requires a change in attitude. The question that I get next is, well, what do I eat for breakfast then? Because breakfasts are supposed to be based in those grains. Well, I have to point out to you that that is a silly notion. Look out the window and show me any other animal in the entire animal kingdom that eats certain kind of foods at one time during the day and other foods the rest of the day. I am certain that it was actually General Mills that kind of proliferated that thought so that we'd be all happy buying our, Wheaties or whatever. So what do you eat for breakfast? Anything that you would eat for lunch or dinner that follows these rules. Nothing that's grain-based. So what's a typical thing for people here is to have eggs. If you had a 2-egg omelet with vegetables in it, that would be an excellent breakfast for you. But the truth is, anything you would eat for lunch or dinner, salad, soup, stew, chicken, hot dogs, anything that you would eat for lunch or dinner that follow these rules is fair game for breakfast as well. So let me take you through what would be a typical day's eating that would follow these rules. And I also want to say that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this idea of a paleo diet, or that there's a lot of misinformation about that. I am talking about trying to eat more like our ancestors did, because Our genes are the same as those ancestors, and those genes are not geared to thrive under the conditions of having too high of a blood sugar and too high insulin levels. But I also recognize that the foods that our ancestors ate are not going to be the same foods that you and I eat because those foods are not available. I don't know, it's been a while since I've seen a mammoth running around my neighborhood. And I'm not going to go out and hunt down rabbit. And any of the wild tubers that our ancestors might have eaten, whether we would call them carrots or potatoes today, are vastly different than what was available to them. But the theory is sound, and it really comes down to getting the grains out of our diet. So here's what a healthy, typical day of eating would look like if you're removing the grains from your diet. For breakfast, a 2-egg omelet with some vegetables. And it can be any vegetables that you like. Asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, mushrooms, tomato, whatever. And a variety. Do different things. In between breakfast and lunch, you should have some sort of snack. Let's say it's a half of an apple. For lunch, you want to have a salad. You want to have a lot of different greens with some sort of protein on it. And that protein can be eggs, it can be fish, it can be chicken. Between lunch and dinner, again, some sort of snack. Let's say it's a handful of nuts. Let's say it's some hummus with some vegetables. Let's say it's a handful of pistachios or almonds or cashews. Dinner, some sort of protein and vegetables. That's a typical day's eating where you've avoided grains completely. There's no sandwich. There's no burger. You can have the burger, you can't have the bun. There's no bread with dinner. There's no rice on that plate. That would be a typical day's eating for you. And I cannot tell you how much that would change your life. 8 weeks is all it would take. So what do you expect in 8 weeks? This is what people report to me. This is what my own personal experience has been as well. And I challenge you to try this for yourself. Again, it's not a lifetime sentence. It's just 8 weeks. If the holidays are a bad time for you and you just can't resist eating those Christmas cookies that your neighbor brought over, or the fruitcake. By the way, I think there is only one fruitcake in existence. It just keeps getting passed from person to person. No one actually eats it. But if this is a harder time for you with the turkey and stuffing or whatever, then wait till the first of the year if you want. But take an 8-week period of time, jump in the deep end, and do this, and you will see these sorts of differences. Ready? Number one, you're going to see a difference in your cravings. As I said, usually happens in 2 to 3 days. The sugar cravings are gone. Also, the result of that is when you don't have all of those excess sugars in your diet, you actually lower the bar on what tastes sweet. And what will happen is after you have a washout period of a couple weeks, you go and you eat a strawberry, and it's going to explode in your mouth, and you're going to remember what sweet was supposed to taste like. The experience cannot be described. It can only be experienced. And so I would encourage you to do it just for that. You're going to lose weight, and even more importantly, you're going to lose fat. I can almost guarantee it. Now, I shouldn't say it that way. I really should say it's going to be a normalization of weight and fat. And so there are people who are probably listening right now who don't necessarily have to lose weight. You will not lose weight on this diet as long as you're getting enough calories. You may convert fat to muscle, and sometimes we're walking around thinking we're skinny, and there's this condition that we call skinny fat. Models have this. They look bone skinny, but actually if you see their percent body fat, it's much higher than it should be. People that are anorexic lose muscle and gain fat. Even though they're skinny, they can have up to 50% body fat. Ultimately, it ends up why they die. So you're going to see a normalization of weight and fat. And for the vast majority of us, especially if we're walking around with insulin resistance, the vast majority of us are going to lose weight and lose fat. Our percent body fat is going to go down. And I would encourage you, before you start this experiment, to actually have a test done so you can see what your percent body fat is. And when you do that, then you'll know what your starting point is, and then you'll see what happens 8 weeks later. There's all sorts of cardiovascular effects. Your blood pressure will normalize. Your cholesterol will normalize. If you have plaques in your blood vessels, those will start to go away. all from getting the sugars and the processed and refined carbs out of your diet. And if you're walking around with a genetic tendency towards cardiovascular issues, and I don't know which ones of us don't really have parents or grandparents that had strokes and heart attacks and high blood pressure and problems with their heart, you're going to make yourself much less susceptible to having that. And that happens regardless of what your blood says. I do not generally pay attention to what cholesterol says the way that medicine does. You may see a lowering of cholesterol. You may see a raising of cholesterol when you do this. It doesn't matter. You will be healthier as far as your heart goes from this experience. You will see all sorts of mental and emotional effects that happen with this. What's happening in your gut and sugar and how your body works directly affects what's going on in between your ears. There's actually more brain chemical activity in your stomach, neurotransmitter activity in your stomach than there is in your brain. And doing this, people see brain fog go away. All of a sudden, they're sharper again. They're able to focus and concentrate. There's less depression. There's less anxiety. There's less sleep issues. People will have a tendency to like you more, just as you'll have a tendency to like other people more. That's an amazing effect. You'll see all sorts of hormonal effects, normalization of your hormones. And so for women, that can mean, if you haven't gone through menopause yet, that can mean more regular cycles. It can mean ability to get pregnant appropriately. If infertility is an issue, it can mean PMS symptoms go away. It can mean related symptoms to PMS symptoms like pain and cramping and headaches and moodiness. All of that can get better. If you're postmenopausal, this can mean the amelioration of hot flashes. It can mean that your body starts working the way it's supposed to. If you're a man, this can mean more appropriate testosterone levels as you age. Grains affect that amazingly. Sugar and insulin affect that incredibly. It means more growth hormone levels. So if you're a guy that works out or a woman that works out and you have a good hard workout, you create a hormone that's called growth hormone. And your body does that to repair and build the muscle that got broken down from you having that workout. And growth hormone is fat targeting as well. And the one thing that stops growth hormone in its tracks is an insulin spike. So if you go and you work out hard and then you have something that you may think is healthy to eat, like a 12-grain whole wheat bagel, you're stopping growth hormone right then and there. And then the last thing I put down here is empowerment, because what all of those things that I just told you about are all ways for you to understand that you actually have the capability of affecting your health on your own. You do not need a doctor. You do not need medicines. You do not need anything more than understanding where we came from, the genetic environment that we created in response to our environment outside, and how to live more in sync with those genes. Chronic disease could be completely ameliorated in this country if we would get off the grains. It really is that simple. Now is a really good time to type in any questions that you may have. Haven't had any questions yet, which means one of two things. You guys are asleep, or I have done such an excellent job of explaining this that no questions were there. But if you want to go ahead and type them in, I'll be happy to address them for a couple minutes before we get out of here. And while you're typing those things in, let me remind you of what's coming up. Next month, I'm going to do a webinar about weight loss, and I'm going to talk about a specific program that we have here and we use here called Healthy Transformations. And this is a very aggressive weight loss program that you could do anywhere, that the results have been in 12 weeks, people properly have lost anywhere from 10 to 12% of their body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, you literally could lose 25 to 30 pounds healthfully in 3 months' time on this Healthy Transformation program. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We actually have a nurse here in our office that runs that program for the local folks, and we are now developing a mechanism to be able to do that program abroad as well through the magic of, the internet. And I also want to point out that all of the webinars that I do end up on my archive. Those are just some of the topics. When I went and looked at the list of them, I was amazed to see that there were more than 24 of them. And so all sorts of topics like you see here and many other ones that you don't see listed here. So I would encourage you to go to the website and check them out, including the talk that I've just done. This is recorded and will end up in the archive probably by next Monday. And so I would encourage you to revisit this issue and share this information with other people as well. I'll also tell you that I will do this one live, just like we're doing now, on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to jump back on, or if you want to have someone else, come and participate, then certainly let them know about that as well. Got a question from Rich here who says, is gluten-free better? Gluten is a protein that's in certain grains: wheat, oat, rye, kamut, spelt, and barley. And there are people who have a particular sensitivity to gluten. And that problem is more widespread than you realize, and then medicine recognizes. However, if you are getting off of grains completely, you are getting off of gluten, because it's all grains. Even rice, which isn't gluten containing, or soy, which isn't gluten containing, you're still going to avoid. And so there's no better. It's like, yes, you will avoid gluten while you are avoiding this as well. So thanks for that question, and thanks for the kind words, Ms. Nordberg. And let's see, a question from Jen that says, would you consider doing a webinar on PCOS in the future? I think a lot of us would benefit from your thoughts on it. Many of us can't tolerate the meds and are looking for alternative ways to reverse the disease. Jen, I appreciate that. That is a great suggestion. I'm making a note of it, and you can count on my webinar in February to be on PCOS. I'm making a note of it, and I will start to plan for that now. So thank you for that question. I appreciate that. Sarah seconded the PCOS thing. All right, there you go. So at least I know I'll have 2 people on that one. So everybody, thank you so much. I encourage you again, get in touch with me during the week. If you have specific issues, maybe you're diabetic and you're on medicines and you want to know what the result of that's going to be, on your insulin, if you're on insulin or on your other meds, then I'm happy to talk to you about that, or email me, and I'm happy to talk to you about that as well. Again, sometimes taking this general information and applying it to you as an individual, you may need some help, and that's what I'm here for. So go right through the website. You can email me or you can call me using our toll-free number. And everybody, thanks for joining me, and I appreciate it, and I look forward to you joining me again. Have a great day.